Interesting details have emerged over the last couple hours. Police say that this teen didn't have any support at home as she gave birth to this child. Well, later in the day, Marietta police say they got a call from her uncle saying something at that house was terribly wrong.
We did discover the mother of the deceased infant digging a hole in the backyard.
A grisly discovery by Marietta police in the backyard of this duplex on Grambling Street.
They did find a body that was obviously recognizable as a newborn infant, that infant was deceased.
Marietta investigators believe hours had passed Sunday after 17-year-old Leticia Rodriguez gave birth to the baby boy at home, apparently alone. But they have a lot of questions about what happened in that time frame.
The medical examiner has the deceased infant, and it will be up to them to determine, was this infant born alive or not? Was the infant viable or not? What is the exact age? What was the cause of death?
Police say those answers could take weeks. For now, Rodriguez faces charges of concealing a death, abuse of a dead body, and abandonment of a dead body. Investigators say the boy did have signs of physical trauma.
Certainly, this is a situation that defies logic.
Of course, it's right across the street, and I'm not used to having anything like this happen in this neighborhood.
Teresa Neal describes her neighborhood as a quiet, working-class area with a lot of people who speak Spanish. She was shocked to see all the commotion Sunday.
I know that there was a heavy police presence here, and of course they couldn't tell me anything, but it really kind of frightens me.
The family has been cooperative with us through this entire investigation, and certainly our hearts go out to them. I can't imagine the trauma. We can't imagine the trauma that they are going through.
All right, so today... we're diving into a really heavy one. This case out of Marietta, Georgia. Just so many layers to unpack, you know.
Right.
A 17-year-old mother, deceased newborn, found in her backyard.
Wow.
And just so many questions swirling around what happened. You ready to take a deep dive with me on this one?
Absolutely. I think it's a situation that really demands a closer look, especially given how little information we have right now.
Yeah, exactly. Right now, all we really have to go on is the police report. And some neighbor commentary.
Oh, okay.
But even that gives us a lot to think about, right? I mean, like the police found the newborn in the backyard, but the mother was actually discovered digging a hole. Like she hadn't even buried the baby yet when her uncle found her and called the police.
That is incredibly intriguing. I mean, like, what was going through her mind in those moments? Was she trying to hide what happened? Or was there something else at play? I mean, it's so hard to say without understanding her state of mind at the time, you know?
Yeah, it's like we're trying to piece together a puzzle, but we only have like half the pieces. And the neighbors are just as confused as we are, right?
Right.
I mean, imagine you've lived across the street from this family for 30 years.
Yeah.
Like this one neighbor, Teresa Neal, has. And they always seem like any other family.
Right.
Then boom, this just unfolds.
Yeah. The shock that these neighbors are expressing really speaks to the fact that we only see a glimpse of what's happening in other people's lives. It's just a stark reminder that, you know, behind closed doors, people can be grappling with incredibly difficult situations that we don't know about.
Yeah. And in this case, those hidden circumstances have led to some very serious legal charges.
Oh, wow.
Concealing a death, abuse of a dead body, abandonment of a dead body, all felonies.
Wow.
Right now, she's being held without bond and will be booked into the Cobb County Adult Detention Center after she's discharged from the hospital.
I mean, those are some significant charges, and each one carries, you know, potential consequences that could really drastically impact her future. I mean, like concealing a death, for example, you know?
Yeah.
It isn't just about the physical act of hiding a body. Like, prosecutors would need to prove intent, like that she deliberately tried to prevent authorities from learning about the death. You know, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this legal case.
It's almost like the initial charges are just the tip of the iceberg. We're really waiting on the medical examiner's report.
Right.
To get a clearer picture of what happened.
The medical examiner's report is going to be absolutely crucial here.
Yeah.
It will determine the cause of death and tell us if the infant was stillborn or born alive. And that distinction could change everything from a legal perspective.
Because if the baby was born alive, we're potentially looking at much more serious charges.
Right. Exactly. We could be talking about murder, aggravated assault, or manslaughter. The severity of these charges really hinges on what that report reveals.
Okay, so legally, it's all up in the air.
Yeah.
But, you know, this case isn't just about the legal side of things, right?
Right.
There are a lot of ethical considerations that we need to think about, too. I mean, this is a 17-year-old mother.
Yeah.
It's hard not to think about the pressures and lack of support she may have been facing.
Yeah, you're right to point that out. We often see teen pregnancy portrayed in a very simplistic way, but the reality is so much more nuanced, right?
Right.
There are so many factors at play, societal expectations, access to resources, just the stigma surrounding young mothers. It's a complex issue, and I think this case highlights the need for a more compassionate and understanding approach.
Yeah. And, it's hard to ignore the fact that 11 Alive chose not to name the mother because she's a minor and hasn't been charged with a violent crime.
Yeah.
That decision, I think, speaks volumes about the ethical dilemmas journalists face when covering sensitive cases like this.
Oh, absolutely. On one hand, you have the public's right to know and the need for transparency. But on the other hand, you have this responsibility to protect the privacy and well-being of a minor, particularly one who is already going through such a traumatic experience. It's a really difficult balance to strike.
And it's a balance we need to be really mindful of as we dive deeper into this case, right?
Right.
Because there's still so much we don't know, and it's important to avoid rushing to judgment.
I couldn't agree more. It's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of a story like this, but we need to remember that we're dealing with real people and a tragic loss of life.
Well said. And speaking of real people, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the impact this case is having on those closest to it, the family and the community.
Okay. Yeah, the police statement offered sympathy for the family, and, it's not hard to imagine the trauma they're going through.
Right.
A teenage daughter facing felony charges, a newborn baby loss. It's a tragedy that's going to impact their lives for years to come.
It's heartbreaking. And it makes you wonder about the father of the baby.
Yeah.
We haven't heard anything about him in any of the reports. Has he been involved at all?
Right.
Where is he in all of this?
Yeah, it's a pretty glaring omission in the information we have, isn't it? It's possible that more details will come out about his role as the investigation progresses.
Right.
But for now, it's just a mystery.
Yeah.
It does make you think about, what support systems might have been in place for this young mother.
Yeah. Speaking of support systems, one detail from the police report that really stuck with me was that she gave birth at home, with no assistance.
Wow.
That paints a pretty stark picture of isolation, doesn't it?
It really does. It raises questions about, did she have access to prenatal care?
Right.
Did she feel comfortable confiding in anyone about the pregnancy? Did she even fully grasp the reality of her situation?
Right. And we talk about teen pregnancy rates declining, but clearly those support systems for young mothers are still really lagging behind.
Yeah.
And, let's not forget, this is Georgia we're talking about, the state that's been, making headlines for restricting abortion access. It makes you wonder about the pressure this girl might have been feeling, given that legal and social climate surrounding her situation.
You've hit on a very important point there. I mean, the legal landscape surrounding these issues absolutely plays a role in shaping the choices that individuals feel like they have available to them. It doesn't excuse any potential wrongdoing, of course, but it does add another layer of complexity, I think, to understanding the factors that may have contributed to this whole tragedy.
So we have the legal charges, the ethical considerations, the missing pieces of the puzzle. It just feels like we're kind of in a holding pattern until that medical examiner's report comes back.
Absolutely. That report really holds the key to so many of these unanswered questions. It will help us to understand not only how the baby died, but also if there were any contributing factors that might lead to, additional charges or conversely might shed light on, mitigating circumstances.
It's interesting to think about how much weight is being placed on this single document. It's not just about determining the cause of death, but it's also about potentially shaping the entire narrative of this case.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that even with all the information we've gathered, we're still only seeing just a fragment of the full picture. We're hearing from the police, from the neighbors, from journalists, but we haven't heard directly from the mother, or from anyone else within the family.
That's a crucial point, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we're really getting a filtered version of events.
Yeah.
And it's important to keep that in mind
as
we process the information that's available.
Absolutely. And we need to remember that the initial charges really focus on the mother's alleged actions after the infant's death.
Right.
Concealing the death, abusing a dead body, and abandoning a dead body. As serious as these charges are, they don't actually speak to the circumstances surrounding the birth or the infant's death itself.
So the legal focus could shift dramatically once that medical examiner's report is released.
Exactly. If the report shows that the infant was born alive and subsequently died due to, the mother's actions or negligence,
Right.
then those charges could escalate significantly. On the other hand, if the report says that the baby was stillborn, then the focus might shift more towards understanding the choices that she made after the birth
Right.
and the reasons behind those choices.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? Trying to understand the legal ramifications while also acknowledging the human element of this whole incredibly sad situation.
Yeah.
A young life has been lost, and the impact of this is going to be felt for a long time.
You're absolutely right. This isn't just a case file or a news story. This is a tragedy with real human consequences. And while the legal system will, run its course,
Right.
it's important for us as observers to approach this with sensitivity,
Yeah.
with nuance, and a willingness to withhold judgment until all the facts are presented.
Well said. And as we delve deeper into this case, it's crucial to keep in mind that there are multiple perspectives to consider.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a really complex interplay of legal, ethical, and human factors.
Right.
And each piece of the puzzle will help us understand the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the legal stuff
Right.
and the speculation, but at the end of the day, this is a story about people.
Yeah.
A family shattered by loss, a young woman facing, a really uncertain future, a community trying to grapple with the shock of it all.
And we can't forget about the baby either.
Right.
A life lost before it even had a chance to really begin.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder of just the fragility of life.
Yeah.
And the impact that, these seemingly private choices can have on the lives of others.
Yeah, this whole case just has me thinking about those ripples. How something like this doesn't just impact the immediate family,
Right.
but the neighbors,
Yeah.
the community, even those of us,
Right.
following it from afar. It's like a shared experience of grief.
Yeah.
Confusion, and just this search for answers.
Well, and what really strikes me is the contrast
Yeah.
between the kind of outward appearance of normalcy
Right.
and the struggles
Right.
that so many individuals face. You have these neighbors describing this family as kind,
Right.
kids running around playing. It's a reminder that we just really have no idea what's happening behind closed doors.
And that brings us back to that central question. How can we prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening
Right.
in the future?
Yeah.
What can we do as individuals, communities, as a society to create, a more supportive environment, especially for young people who are facing difficult choices?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
There's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think it starts by recognizing that these issues are rarely black and white. There's always more to the story than what we see on the surface.
So much of this seems to go back to the idea of support systems. If this young woman felt isolated and alone,
If she didn't have anyone to turn to for help,
right.
it's just, I can't imagine the fear
Yeah.
and desperation she must have been feeling.
Absolutely. And we need to create a culture
Yeah.
where young people, especially young women, feel empowered to actually seek help and support
Right.
without fearing judgment or stigma.
Right.
And that requires, I think, a shift in societal attitudes, a willingness to listen
Yeah.
without condemning, and a real commitment to just providing those resources,
Yeah.
making them accessible.
It's about building a safety net that catches people before they fall through the cracks.
Exactly. It's about fostering an environment where individuals feel seen, heard, and supported,
Yeah.
no matter their circumstances.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
We examined the legal stuff, the ethical considerations,
Right.
the human impact of this tragedy. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought. What can you do
Yeah.
in your own life to create a more empathetic and understanding world? It might be a small gesture, a kind word,
Yeah.
or just a willingness to listen without judgment. But those small acts,
Right.
they can have a huge ripple effect, creating change that extends far beyond ourselves.
Well said. And as we wait for more information to surface about this case, let's just try to hold on to that thought.
Sure.
Challenge ourselves to be more compassionate, more understanding, and more willing to lend a helping hand. Because sometimes that's all it takes to really make a difference.